All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Going to do another episode with Donna Barrow-Green today. She's back to
Hello.
talk about lots of writing, lots of different writing-related topics, I guess. We're going to talk about characters and plots, like typical tropes, and also some authors that we like, and both of our fictional characters and stories that we've created, and then we could just sort of talk about things that we're working on too, like we were just a little earlier. So yeah, we can start off anywhere you want to.
Oh, cool. Well, I was let's see. I've taken a break from the Diarist. I finished season 1, which ended up having, I don't even know, like I honestly don't know how many, maybe like 17, maybe 18 episodes. And it was really fun and it was awesome. And it was I think I remember we talked about it was like fully cast and the whole sound production thing, which I can totally relate when we were talking about how podcasting just takes up all your time. I mean, it was like sound editing is just unbelievable. And then we were recording but it's interesting, like with the whole tropes, because, that story was like, I used like sort of the 50s and the sort of Mad Men era. And then also the sort of just like women's roles as sort of like a context to really explore some pretty serious feminist issues. And and I do that a lot with like characters, as I place them in time periods where I can explore that. And with this one, it was kind of stylized, so I could even do that more. But then I've been going through like a different sort of like, I don't know, like an existential change with my writing. And so I think I don't want to necessarily explore some of those same themes, and I don't even know if they're tropes, but like some of those same issues, like in the same way. So I've been working on a memoir, but I haven't really been doing much fiction, and I don't know if I'm going to do a season 2.
So
I don't think I am.
Oh, okay. How come?
Yeah. Season 1 ended in a pretty good place. I think I feel like I just feel like my writing's changed, and that's
You're cutting in and out a little bit there.
like I was kind of thinking about it the other day, because I'm 53, I think. Can you hear me now?
Still there? Yeah, you're cutting
in
and out a little bit.
No.
It might work back. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're cutting in and out a little bit. It might work better if you just turn your camera off.
Turn my camera off? Okay, let's see. All right, let's see. Camera. There we go.
Okay.
All right, is that better?
Yeah, that does sound better right now, yeah.
If you want, I could, all my mics and everything are upstairs, because I'm down here in my shop, but I can. Do you want me to? Is it okay?
No, yeah, this is working fine.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, so I feel like I've gone through this change in my writing, and I don't know, like the characters aren't as compelling to me in the same way. I am sort of thinking of a novel, but I don't know when or if that will come to fruition.
Oh, okay. So I mean that makes sense. I mean, your mood changes sometimes, and you want to be in the right mood for whatever you're writing is. And if you're writing fiction, that makes sense. And I mean, like you said, you're still working on something. You're still working on a writing project anyway. You're working on your memoirs, like you said. So how is that different? I guess how is writing a memoir different in terms of process in comparison to writing fiction?
Well, I wrote a memoir like a while back that was that I had posted a few places and self-published. It was pretty well received, and it was pretty I think I told you last time we talked that I had a pretty traumatic childhood, and so
Yeah.
a lot of my memoirs and stuff in my writing is like dealing with that trauma. And when I wrote the one that I self-published a while ago, it was really it was almost narrative, which I kind of think whether it's a journal article or whatever it is, it kind of has to be narrative because people want a story whether or not it's fiction or not.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like people don't want just like a bunch of facts or
Yeah.
like this is my story. So mine was pretty narrative, and it was like about one time in my one period in my life when I was a teenager and things were really crazy, and but that one was like kind of like in a way not re-experiencing the trauma, but it was still within that trauma paradigm. And all of my fiction is also in kind of that same trauma paradigm. And so when I would write like that, I would write really, really fast, and I would sort of like be in an almost like an altered state. And now, like the memoir I'm writing now is not in that altered state. And like, I think I told you, it's taking me a lot longer because I feel like I'm really connected to it. And I'm also, I'm not totally sure. Like this one I'll have to like a lot of times I don't write a lot of drafts. I just write it and it comes out and I'm done. But this one, I think because I'm so conscious of it, like I have like maybe like 150 pages or something. So I have a good, I have a good start. But this one is much more like I don't know, I guess it's much more like nonfiction. And it looks at my, in a really kind of like pretty straightforward way, the abuse that I experienced, like with like a lot of the stuff I write about trauma, I'll write about the trauma, but then I always have like some sugar coated like fantasy aspect where I'm like in denial or something. Like when I wrote the memoir about being a teenager, like on the one hand, I was writing about my parents' like abuse and substance abuse and problems. But on the other hand, I was always like fixated on infatuations and boys. And that's the same with my novels. These women are in really bad situations, but they think it's romantic or something. And I use those tropes deliberately, but now I'm not doing that. So now I'm sort of like, here's the abuse. And then I'm beginning to unpack a lot of the neuroscience because I think I told you that I teach.
Yeah. Yeah, you did.
And both of my parents had serious brain injuries and brain surgeries. And so I'm, after all this research I've done and everything, I'm sort of like unpacking my childhood from the neuroscience perspective too. And then also mostly that, and also my own like learning disabilities and stuff, which they think is a result of the trauma I experienced. So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
a totally different thing.
You said, you said before that you found out as an adult that you have dyslexia, right?
Yeah, I have dyslexia, and I have like several other kinds of like I have visual spatial processing disability. I have like it doesn't, not surprising, like a super high language and, scores, but I have dyslexia, and I have also visual spatial and other issues like that with memory and stuff. And the doctor totally, linked it to trauma, and now I've studied that so much for my teaching and also just for this book that it totally makes sense how that happened.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I bet knowing the neuroscience of it definitely helps illuminate that. And yeah, I remember you telling me that you teach is it neuroscience that you teach, or is it something slightly different?
No, it is different. I teach infant toddler mental health. So I basically teach about how to work with families with young children to prevent or to address abuse and neglect and other risk factors.
Oh,
So I
okay.
like teach a few classes. One of them is development, and that's where I really look at the neuroscience and brain development and stuff. And then, but that's kind of the core of the whole infant mental health field
Mm-hmm.
is brain science and how early first birth to 3 parenting affects development, and outcomes. And there's a lot of research on that now.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
So
I've
yeah.
heard that's interesting. I read a book, I think it was last year, a new one called The Coddling of the American Mind by
Oh,
Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. And a large part of it is about childhood development because um, it's basically linking a lot of the stuff that is happening on some university campuses in the US and some in Canada too. Only a small number of universities, but a lot of the major universities apparently too, where kids are saying that they're physically harmed by a conservative coming to speak or something like that. And this whole sort of thing that's it's not like it's not even the majority of the universities, but it's the most prestigious ones. And they talk about how it's not it's not good for healthy psychological development, and that a lot of this sort of thing of looking to an authority figure to solve problems instead of working on solving problems yourself and getting improving your interpersonal conflict skills is due to a lot of it is due to overprotective parenting. And they go through a lot of studies and stuff like that to support what they're saying, like how for example, in some places, I think it's in New York City, this woman got arrested for allowing her 9-year-old son to take the New York City subway to school by himself and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting book, and it's an
so
interesting look at childhood development.
it's funny because I'm familiar with that woman who's almost got arrested, and then I'm familiar with I don't know if I'm familiar with the book, but I think my daughter has she's in high school and she had to read like this kind of like these political essays, and one of them I think might have been taken from that book, and they were talking, I don't know if it's the same thing, but they were talking about like trigger warnings.
Yeah,
And
yeah, it is the
is it
same
this?
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wonder if it's the same guy. And I'm like, with that, I'm totally on the same page. Like, I think, I don't know, the whole like, I don't know, the whole trigger warning or the whole like cutting discourse in college because um so you might offend somebody. I mean, I think I'm on the same page with that. I feel like no, you need to be able to have like discourse, and you need to be able to like talk about it and kind of find a middle ground um stuff. But I think like with the other one that you talked about, there's this woman, the woman whose kid was in New York. It's I think it's the same. I'm pretty sure it's the same woman. She wrote this book, Free Range Parenting.
Yeah, I think it's
Um,
the same woman.
yeah, I do too. And I don't know, like when my daughter was little, like all of these like super liberal, like white privileged women were. I hope they don't hear this. We're so into this quote unquote free range parenting, and they were like, it's like that something like that isn't gonna like hurt or harm a kid. You really have to judge a kid's um you really have to judge a kid's development, and like I always was like this mom who wrote this book, she's like, we have to have a more hands-off society. It's like, well, why are you spending your whole life writing about parenting your kid then? You know what I mean? Like you're kind of over involved and doing like lectures and stuff. But I just remember these parents being like, you're overprotective, you have to like we're all going to drop our kids off at the park on Saturday when my kid was like 5. I'm like, yeah, you've lost your mind. Like I am not going to leave my kid in the middle of a park in Portland, Oregon. But anyway, I mean, I get her point, but like I think the stuff, that I like work with and deal with is really more like, just the basics. Like, are you, and some of it like does cross over, but mostly it has to do with trauma. And
Yeah.
like, do you respond to your baby when they're crying? Like, what are your mental representations of parenthood? And then what factors? I mean, that's kind of the stuff I'm writing about too, because, in my own family, there was, I have no, I mean, one thing that I realized, which is so crazy while I'm writing this, like, I don't know what, both of my parents are deceased, but I don't have one story about my dad his whole life.
Oh, wow.
I know. And I asked my siblings because I was like, when I started working on, I mean, I've been working on this my whole life, right? But like, I was like, I don't know. We grew up where he grew up. I don't have one story about him having friends or a girlfriend or going sledding or a job or where he lived. Like there wasn't, I don't have one story about my dad. And I asked my siblings, and I think my brother had one story maybe of like some random thing that my dad, nothing major. I mean, we knew nothing. And that kind of speaks to my dad's insane, like psychopathy. But like, what was I going to say? Oh, but like, so the field that I study, looks at, do
What,
you
wait,
nurture
wait,
your,
sorry. How does that speak to his psychopathy?
well, okay, so that it's like in the book, right? So like
Yeah.
he was like, my dad was a person who, he was a scientist, he was a chemist, and he also was very like he had two sides to him, or maybe he had more, I don't know, but he would only show certain sides to people, and he was like extremely manipulative, and like in true, like I think even though my mom was like more messed up, and hers is definitely a lot of brain trauma and her own child abuse, and maybe my dad's was too because he died of a brain tumor, but like we didn't know anything about his childhood, and he like that he would keep that from his kids, and he would only show us like certain sides of him. And like with me, he had either like this side that was sort of like weirdly like sort of I don't even know what the word is, intimate, I guess. And then the other side of my dad was this out of control, like rage, like almost homicidal. And that rage, like,
Wow.
yeah, no, I mean, that's like, I know. And that's what, like, with both of my parents, like, I argue in this memoir that they are criminals. And like, I try to like separate out, like, if you read a book about someone who's abused as a kid and they're angry, right? Like, then they're bitter and they're like, they were criminals. I'm like, no, I'm going to set out to explain how they're criminals, okay? And then we're going to talk about their brains, because I'm not, yes, obviously I was the person who was abused, well, myself and my siblings, but my parents, like I rated them on the psychopathy checklist, just, they were way in that range, and
Wow.
yeah, and like both of them, I mean, it's kind of gets into a longer thing, but like, I mean, one thing that I've sort of come to with my mom, and this has been really, really hard, is that like I always feel like I'm so crazy when I say these things, but like I'm pretty sure she killed people, and so
Seriously?
yeah,
Holy shit.
yeah.
So tell me what makes you think that. That's
Okay.
fascinating
So well,
in a bad way.
let me tell you this, right? Like so when I'm working on this stuff with my mom, I text my brother, who I'm very close to both of my siblings. And I kind of had this moment of like, holy shit, my mom probably murdered people, right? So I was like, texted my brother. I said, do you think mom is capable of murder? Right? Just text it. He goes, absolutely. He's like, I know she is. She tried to kill me, she tried to kill all of us. But, when you,
Holy shit.
yeah, when you have child abuse, though, like so many weird things are like wrapped up in it that it's not like you can just like unfold it or go to therapy and be like, oh, this makes sense now. No, because an abusive family or a dysfunctional family has its own logic, and people on the outside can't make sense of the logic. So they think you're crazy. And on the inside, the logic makes sense. So for us, yeah, okay, she poisoned us. Okay, she like did X, Y, and Z. And that's like one of the things too, like that I think with being experiencing so much trauma, like I have to like that's why it's taking me so long to write this, is because, and I'll tell you about my mom and the murder thing in a second, but it's taking me so long to write this because I'm having to like rationally connect with what these things mean, so like I literally like my dad was, again, like I said, he had these two sides and no one ever acknowledged this terrible side that he had, and yet it was there. It was extremely violent. And when I was like a teenager, he threw me against the wall and he had his hands around my neck and he was like strangling me. And
Jesus.
and I never, like, even now as I'm talking to you, like, I can't connect that that is violent. So I spent like 2 weeks Googling strangulation, domestic violence, like trying to like see it as that. And I accept that it is, but I don't really feel like it is, if that makes any sense.
Because it's so repressed,
No, it's not repressed. It's just that the or well maybe
compartmentalized,
huh?
compartmentalized.
Maybe. Yeah, I think that the feelings are not connected to it, but the like I have like a memory of it, but it's like I don't or maybe yeah, I guess maybe the feelings aren't there. I mean, like I don't know why. Like literally, and it's been like every single thing that I remember or that I mean, most of these memories have been there, but it's connecting that to the emotions in a grounded conscious way, which is very different. So anyway, so like with so I've been doing that and it's just taken me forever to write because I'll literally go like I found out so much about domestic violence and like when somebody does choke or strangle somebody, like that's one of the big indicators that that's a big risk for homicide. Like if you're in a say in a marriage, I didn't really look parent, father, child, but like that's one there's like they have this checklist now of like to talk to survivors of domestic violence and say, do you experience this, this, and this? And that's one of those that said, you're at risk of being killed by this person because the act of strangling someone is so, um, it's just so violent, you know, and it's so personal. Like they
Yeah.
talk about that
Fuck.
too.
Yeah.
You know, you have your hands around somebody's neck. It's so personal. You know, you want to fucking kill them, you know? And so like with so that's my dad and I'm writing about that, but I'm also just writing to like lay out the argument that they're criminal. Like I need the reader to know I'm not just saying this because I'm angry. I'm not just saying this whatever, you know. And it's not really to prove anything, but it's just to like rationally lay out the story and then begin to unpack the neuroscience and the experiences. And but yeah, like with my mom's, you know, so she was so out of control, you know, she definitely poisoned us. She like, you know,
Holy shit.
yeah, she totally poisoned all of us at different times. Like she did all kinds of things, but she also worked, of course, in a. She became a nurse, right? And she worked in homes with elderly people, right? And like when I was a teenager, she had me and my sister work in these homes like full time with her, and she would do this with us too, like do all of these kind of like medical quote unquote treatments or experiments. And, you know, again, it was very normalized in my family. But I started to go, wait a minute, you know, like, and then when she eventually moved back to Georgia and she opened her own quote unquote, she called it a nursing home, but it was like a group home. And I'm like, I fucking know she killed those people, or at
Holy
least some of
shit.
them.
Your life sounds like a Stephen King novel.
Yeah, no, it totally was. And I think, um, I don't know, you know, I'm 55. It's like I'm unpacking this. I don't, and so by doing this in this very conscious way, like all the other writing has like totally changed now, you
It
know, and I don't,
gotten darker?
no, it was so dark before, but I think it's just more conscious, you know, it's more like, because before I was like, when I would write, I'd be like along for the ride. You know what I mean? Like I'm
Mhm.
along for the ride, wherever you take me, brain.
Yeah,
Now I'm
yeah.
like, in the driver's seat and maybe I will go back along for the ride, but um I just think part of going along for the ride though was like repeating those same narratives to myself, you know.
Right. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I totally well, I mean, I guess it depends on what type of writing you're doing, right? Like, at least for me, it's way easier to just go on the ride if you're writing fiction, especially if I'm writing a short story or something. I sometimes I do some planning. Like if I realized to like almost at the end of the first draft of my novel that I should have sketched out like what the characters are and remember the like the extreme plot twist that I'm going to reveal later and which characters they're supposed to involve that just kind of come to me as I'm writing. But then with like with nonfiction, it's more like depending on what I'm writing about, if I'm writing a blog or something like that, or I'm writing out what I want to say on one of my videos about a nonfiction topic, it's like involving me doing a whole bunch of research and then writing about what I have researched or whatever I'm talking about or something like that. So it's way less of going on a ride, and it's more of just you kind of get that too, because you want to, at least for me, I'd still want to go in the flow of wherever the writing is going, but
Right.
it's less that, because I'm also thinking about whatever I want to be talking about, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, and, it's like I know exactly what you mean, because I've like done like nonfiction writing, like for work or essays, or I do a lot of activism with around sexual assault and stuff. And there's still kind of a narrative to it, but it's a lot less like. But when I write like novels and stuff, it's totally along for the ride. Although I did, a lot of times I'll write like straight through, but I wrote a series of novels, and I ended up like outlining like exactly what you were saying, where I was like, you better write this down. Like, you better sit down and like write everything you've been thinking. I never ever do that, but I did a whole like outline, and it was so tiring. I'm like, I don't want to do this, but I ended up doing it was for the second novel in my series. Because so much was like, oh, and then this twist, and then this twist. But um, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know though what'll happen. I'm a little worried about my fiction. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen.
Well, I'll have to see what happens, I guess. I mean, what do you think you would do if like, do you think you would just stick to writing more nonfiction if like the worst case scenario would happen? Or do you think there's maybe like a good chance of you being able to like get the right feeling with fiction just because you've been doing it for so long?
I don't know. Like, I think like I really don't know. I mean, I kind of trust that like it will come back, and hopefully what will come back will be like the next phase of my writing or something, because it's like I have been in a weird way writing the same story. You know what I mean? Like, even though I've written a
Hmm.
bunch of books, or I don't know, a bunch, but like it's kind of the same story in a way. It's the kind of like unconscious mental representations of my life and what it means to be a woman and love, and that's why I was kind of sick of the Diarist, because I was like, I need a woman now with a little more agency, who's,
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean?
I haven't listened to every episode of The Diarist, but what I've listened to, and based on what I've read of your similar writing, I totally understand what you mean in terms of like the female protagonist. She doesn't seem to have that much agency.
No, and she like holds on to these old like ideas about like love and romance, and she hopes that's going to save her, and I mean, I've written a lot of like short stories and stuff that don't have that, but I think most of my stories are driven by that same thing, and it's like, I don't know, like I'm thinking of this, like when I wrote my first novel, like I spent like 2 years just sort of thinking about it, and it would come to me and the plot would develop sort of on its own, and then I wrote it. And so I'm kind of having that experience right now with this new one. Um, but and I'm thinking that this character would be a lot different,
Okay, yeah, that'd be interesting to have that sort of difference. Like, I mean, I know what you mean in terms of that. Like, I like to. There are certain subjects that I just naturally end up writing about. Usually, when I'm writing fiction, like I usually end up writing about like killers and monsters and aliens and stuff like that. Like crime drama or like science fiction or fantasy or something like that. But sometimes I have this like normal way of writing a short story sometimes where I just have the protagonist and then there's a bunch of violence, and then especially if I'm writing a short story, often the main character dies at the end because it's a short story. So sometimes I like to do the opposite of
Right.
that and like have the main character survive at the end or something like that.
Um, that I just listened to this this interview with, Michael Pollan, who does he did
Oh yeah, he did oh, what's that one? The Omnivore's Dilemma?
yeah, and
And he did one about psychedelics recently, right?
yeah, I'm actually listening to that one on Audible, but I listened to an interview with him on this podcast, Long Form. Do you know that podcast?
No, but I've heard him interviewed on Joe Rogan's podcast and on Tim Ferriss's podcast, and
Oh,
maybe
okay.
like one or two others too.
Oh, well, he probably talked about this stuff then, but he talked a lot about like basically, like there's like, I don't know how he said it, but it was like basically like, a writer has their story that they write about. You know what I mean? Like, and for him, it always comes back to nature, or whatever. And he also said some interesting things about like, even though like when you write nonfiction, you still, it's not like you're lying, but he's like, you only like, you're still telling a story, and you're still bringing like certain parts of your personality. You're not bringing all of your personality, you're sort of crafting something that people want to listen to. And I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I was thinking about that, it's like, maybe my writing will change, but like, all writers kind of have their theme, their story, and I think mine is like psychology, it's good and evil. It's this like, these levels of like injustice and, and it all comes from basically still, always searching for these injustices. Cause like the thing with my mom, as bad as she was, and she was terrible, she underwent brain surgery in 1970. And I think she already had like brain damage before that from a car accident, but I'm 90% sure that this brain surgery she had was for mental illness and something went very wrong. And so a lot of my research has been like,
Oh,
yeah, a lot of my research has been around that. And I kind of feel like I like caught the zeitgeist because I started researching and writing about this new wave of psychosurgery in like 1970. There was a new wave of like basically like lobotomy in the 70s.
oh wow.
And like I did all this research like 3 years ago. I found all this stuff. I mean, I had to like order, I got reports from all of these things. And now you can find all kinds of stuff about it, which is awesome. But I was like, I was totally on the zeitgeist. Do you know what I mean? Like I was like there I was. This was going to come out and it was coming out. But my mom, 90% sure, because she underwent a brain surgery and, all of the details are the same as these psychosurgeries. And no one ever talked about it. But at that time, there was this doctor like an hour away at Mass General who recruited over 600 people in that area to do these surgeries for a study.
Wow.
And her psychiatrist was affiliated with that. I mean, I'm sure that's what happened. And I just found this study that was like two of the patients had like something went wrong. They had like a brain hemorrhage. And that's what my mother always told everybody was what happened to her, was that she had like this stroke or brain hemorrhage, right? But like no one ever knew why. So anyway, so that's been like part of this book as well, is like looking at that. But I think for me, always knowing deep down that brain surgery is what really pushed her into this really horrible realm. Like I've always had this sense of injustice and like, just like the way it is, that there is corruption, there's injustice. People, like, you think of all the things that are happening in America right now, like right in front of our faces, and I feel like that's always been at the core of my writing, it's just this, not even trying to fix it, but just being so mad about it,
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that such a such an essential and traumatizing part of your life would affect you psychologically that much and influence what you do creatively, especially when you're writing fiction, because you have to, well, like, simulate psychology basically of the characters that you're creating. So you have to like draw from yourself in that way. I don't know what that says about me if based on my fiction, what my story is, because all my characters are like fucked up criminals.
Well, it could be the same. I mean, like, right? Like you're just exploring these dualities. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's like because like
I
we're
usually
all
do that. That's what I usually like. It seems like what I often do, especially with my fiction, is just explore dark and fucked up shit because it's like it fascinates me because I'm not like that at all. Like
right.
like I'm a really good and caring person and stuff, but I'm fascinated by like violent movies and serial killers and stuff like that because I have so much trouble imagining how someone could actually be like that and do something. So it's fun because there are no real life consequences of me imagining these terrible things.
Right. And well, it's funny, not funny, but like I'm like pretty obsessed with I don't think I was always like this, but I'm pretty obsessed with like true crime and I think in particular writing this book, but also like other books I've written and like, it kind of comes down to this fundamental question is like why what makes somebody like that, And like I'm
Yeah.
listening to this book on tape right now. What is it called? You would probably really like it. It's I'll tell you what it is. I'm on my phone looking up on Audible, but I'm almost done with it. But it's what is it called? Oh, it's called Murdering Minds. Okay, it sounds kind of crazy, but it's by this Dean Hadcock, and he's a neuroscientist. So it's all research based, and he's really looking at like what is going on in the brains of these people who do these things. Like like I just, what makes somebody I mean, really, like, what makes somebody like that? And I feel
Yeah.
like it's fucking like it's so existentially, I don't know, like how can you be counter of what what human beings are created, I think, or how I mean, I say that, but then I think of all the terrible things people do in the name of politics or whatever, but like, what makes someone capable of like not caring like that?
Yeah. Well, like I think most people are not like that. So that's why it's so much more interesting. Like you were mentioning like politicians too. Like I'm pretty cynical about politicians in general and I know a lot of people are, but I mean, it seems to me like if there is something to what a lot of people say about politicians that they're like sociopathic or something like that. I'm sure some of them are genuine, and I like a few that seem like they're genuinely good people. But it seems like if whether we're talking about politicians or maybe on the like way more extreme end of the spectrum than that, like serial killers or something like that, most people I think are like nothing like that, or at least not much like that, because everyone really like lies and manipulates occasionally, even if you like never are like that otherwise.
Well, it's funny because I agree with you. I feel the same. Like, I feel like most people are pretty much good, and like even if people like mess up or whatever, but this book talks about how how did he say it? Like one in 100 people are meet the criteria for psychopath.
Oh
So
wow,
that's a
that's a
lot of
lot.
people,
Yeah.
right? And but like he defines psychopath pretty clearly, and like he differentiates between like a functional psychopath and like a criminal psychopath, and then really terrible criminal psychopath. So like most psychopaths who aren't criminal are like they are politicians, or they run like the stock exchange, or they work in business. They really harness those traits, because it's all a set of traits, right? And
Do
then
I remember correctly that most psychopaths are that kind of way? They're like adjusted or functional psychopaths, like they just take the sort of roles in society like the ones you just mentioned.
I can't remember the numbers, but I think it is a lot of people. And then even within the other group of people who do commit crimes, most of them are not like I don't know, I say evil, but most of them aren't like sadistic, terrible.
Yeah,
And
they're
this
not,
guy,
most of them are not like Ted Bundy or something like that.
no, they're not. They're like, they just don't care about consequences, or they just, but the ones who are really bad, like he's done, or not he's done, he talks about research that between all of those groups and the parts of the brain that they now know look different in each part. Now, I don't know why. I mean, I haven't gotten through the whole book, but I'm like, like right down to the really bad ones. Like he talked about this structure in the brain, the hippocampus, which is like memory and connects to these other areas. But one side of the hippocampus is different in the really, really, really bad psychopaths. Like it's
Oh, okay.
like, what does that mean? I'm like, and then of course, like I'm thinking about my parents, and I'm like, in my book that I'm writing, I'm like mapping out the areas of their brain, like when my mom had the surgery, the limbic system, all emotions. My dad had a brain tumor on the left side, so like I'm just trying to like from this stuff go like, could this be what happened? Like, because why are they like that? Why are
Yeah.
people like that? Um,
Yeah, you mentioned
but
that you thought your mom was gonna have a surgery that might have been botched that could have had something to do with that, right?
mhm.
So do you think
She
how do you think that might have happened in your dad if that was the case with him?
I don't know. See, that's a little harder because I'm like, he had he well, it's he had like what was I gonna say? He had like cancer, different kinds of cancers and different kinds of tumors and stuff. And he had one like in his neck when back in the 60s. And then the brain tumor he had was actually in the outer layer of his brain. So it's not, unless there's pressure or something, it probably wasn't pressing on anything, but I don't know. I mean, that's something I was actually going to contact one of these neuroscientists once I get a little closer and say, can I, consult with you and just like ask you some questions? But I don't know with my dad, like, I think that, I don't know, like he to me is more the question mark because he was so like, I mean, he was so cold and mean and like he had no empathy for his friends, or he was, he was just such a dark person that could turn on some charm, but really, I don't know what happened to him, and of course no one in his family ever, like they were all cold and dark too, like it's like he had a stepsister who ran away when she was 16 and no one even cared. No one even talked about her. And I asked his mother one day, like, whatever happened to Betty? And she goes, oh, she sent me a letter, wanted to visit. I ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. I'm like,
Holy shit.
what the fuck? Like,
Yeah.
what is that? Like, it's just not how people, even myself as someone who was really abused as a kid and all that, like my instinct with my daughter, my instinct, even with that upbringing, is always to help, and sometimes, obviously I get overprotective or I don't do the right things, but like most people's instinct is to be kind to other people, so it's like,
Yeah.
what?
Even if you're like pretending or something like that.
Right? Right. You would never say I ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. Like,
Yeah.
okay, like, so I don't know I don't think, I was thinking because I'm getting older, like the other day, I was like, you may never uncover these deep, dark secrets, like, um, I just kind of had that revelation. Like I interviewed that I actually have this on audio recorded, but I interviewed this terrible aunt of mine. I shouldn't say it, but who knows if she listens. But I like called her because she was my mother's only and best friend. My mother was so terrible. I'm like, how could somebody like my mother? Like nobody, like, oh, I guess maybe some people did, but like she was terrible to her children, all of her children, whatever. So I call this aunt and oh my God, what a freaking bizarre conversation I had. And I was like doing it on like Skype or something, right? And so I was like recording her, but I could see myself. So I could see myself controlling like what I'm saying, like so I'm not responding. She was so fucking crazy, and I'm like, it just was, again, like, again, when you're in the bad family dynamic, it has its own set of rules, it has its own terrain, and it has its own logic. And when you're out of it, they seem crazy or you're crazy. Like, there's no in between, and like
Yeah.
she was saying all this stuff, like she was saying this crazy stuff to me. And I have the whole thing recorded, and I'm going to transcribe it and have it in my book, because I'm like, I mean, she was so like, oh, I can't even get into it. But it was just like my husband would walk in and be like, oh my God. I'm like, this is them. Like my daughter will say, I feel like your mom and dad aren't even related to me. I'm like, good.
Yeah, that is
Good.
good. Yeah. That's great, actually.
I know. So I know it's like, I never wanted, well, my dad had already died, but my mom, I never wanted her anywhere near my daughter. She was so dangerous and cruel,
Yeah.
so,
Well, it's amazing that you got over that too.
oh, I know. And my siblings too. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it was because my mom's stuff was so much brain trauma, and it wasn't genetic and it wasn't necessarily environmental. I mean, she had a hard childhood, but I think she had brain trauma, and like you don't, I mean, you don't really inherit that, and she was so crazy that it was like we didn't really identify with her, like we got
Right.
more, which I think some people who have hard childhoods, they really want acceptance. Like all we wanted was to get away from her. Like
Right.
that's so
Yeah.
terrible.
Oh,
Like
well,
we
that's
don't
good.
want you.
Yeah, that does seem like a common and even more fucked up thing that be like because they're your parent, you still like you want them to approve of you and you want to please them regardless of and you might and especially as a child you might not understand that something that's like weird and fucked up is weird and fucked up because it's normalized like you said, so that it sounds like that's a good thing that that did not happen too.
Yeah, I think that that's what kind of saved us, was that we were like, nope, we're getting out of here. And um, yeah, I mean, I feel very lucky because I do know, like, even that aunt that I was telling you about, for some reason lately, I think it's because I'm writing this, but like, just been thinking about them because she has like 6 kids. They live in the deep South. They're like, all of them are like, quote unquote Christians or whatever. And I'm friends with her on Facebook because I only made friends with her so that I could try to have this interview with her. Anyway, long story. But she abused, like I lived with them, right? She abused all of her children. And so did her husband, who was my mother's brother. And I witnessed this whole thing, like really pretty significant physical abuse. And they all love her, and so like they all like, all her kids, her grandkids, like they all love her. And so I was like thinking, well, how does that happen? I'm like, well, maybe she changed, or
Yeah.
maybe they're stuck in I mean, there's a million reasons, right? Like maybe she wasn't as bad as what I saw. But I do know that when I was talking to her about my mom, she was like, she was such a bitch. But then she like broke down and she was like, I just hope my children never, never do what you did. I'm like, yeah, you should hope for that.
Wow.
Oh yeah, they're so like they say the craziest things. So yeah, so that's, but all that.
Yeah. Wow. Hmm.
It's crazy. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
the more you dig though, I mean, I always think that's what's interesting too about being a writer is like, like this aunt kept saying to me, you know what? Let it go, Donna. Let it go. Forgive, move on. It's like, okay, well, I'm sure you want me to, but like, and I guess, some people say that, move on or whatever. But I think when you're a writer, like you just like follow this, if it's a fiction, right? Like you just follow the narrative, you follow the string and you go where you go. If it's nonfiction, you're like, I know there's something here. You know what I mean? And like, I know there's something here and I'm going to dig a little bit. I'm going to dig and find this out. And I mean,
Like
I
an
found out
investigative journalist.
totally, like I found out stuff that I'm like, I mean, this whole like brain surgery stuff in Massachusetts in 1970. I'll send you like some of the links to the lectures that I found. I think you would find it really interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, I guess we kind of talked about what my characters are like and what my characters and what your characters are like rather, and the sorts of settings and plots that we do too. Do you want to talk about like types of those that you like in other writers, or like some of our favorite authors? I know you said you haven't read much fiction lately, but I like lots of nonfiction books too. But we talk about any of that.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like I've talked a lot about my stuff too. I've just been, I'm a talker, as you probably know. What about like your stuff though? So you do I mean, most of them are looking at these sort of dual sort of sides of people and life and like good versus evil. And I mean, is it?
No, I would say most of the time in the fiction that I write, it's sort of like a whole bunch of people that are morally gray for the most part. There are people who are like better, more like closer to being good guys than other people, but a main aspect of what happens with my main protagonist Michael in my novel, for example, is that he was like a mob enforcer who he's like his rage got so bad sometimes that it would interfere with his relationship with his girlfriend, and so he got out of that world when his wife got pregnant with their daughter, and then when she gets kidnapped, he basically gets pulled back into that world and then very quickly becomes very okay with being violent again, and like does all sorts of bad things, and then there are other characters who basically are like assassins or contract killers who work for his uncle, who is like a mob boss and who he was working for before, and they're like basically I tell it from the perspective of bad guys and criminals, but I present them as if they're the good guys, and the other people who are against them are even worse. So it's kind of like that.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Like it's like you've like adjusted the baseline
Yeah.
of good and evil.
Yeah.
That's
And then
pretty cool.
I try to make it to the point that people like these people a lot of these people can work together, but you can't necessarily trust everyone, and then I kind of gradually reveal throughout it that a few of the characters are manipulating others without them knowing about it to set them up to get fucked over basically.
That sounds. Are you? So you said that you're kind of like doing a lot of the podcasting stuff, but are you able to kind of keep one foot in that world a little bit?
Yeah, I keep working on my novel. Like I usually I try to get to it like at least once a week or something like that, and like edit at least like 5 pages or something like that. And I'm pretty close to the end of doing that for my final edit now, but I'm much farther behind on publishing my novel chapters on my blog because I started doing that way later. So I'll reach a certain point. It'll probably still be a little while longer, but I'll reach a certain point where I'm done editing the what I'm hoping will be the final draft of my novel, and then I can just focus on publishing all the chapters on my blog. And once I'm done that, I think I was telling you this before, I'm planning on self-publishing it on Amazon at first because I just want to try that and see how it works before I even try doing like the traditional publishing route. Because for one thing, that sounds really difficult, and for another thing, I want to see if there's any interest if I just do it that way.
And we talked too. Like, did you ever think of doing that Wattpad?
Yeah, I post all of my stuff on there, like including all of my podcasts and stuff too. So
Oh,
I
do
post,
you?
yeah.
Because I haven't done it in a while because, like I said, I haven't really been writing, but like I not only did I meet so many people, but I got to talk about my book and like, people read it and like, I just think it's I mean, I really think it's awesome. It didn't, some people actually do get published from it. I didn't, but, published by publishing houses or whatever. But
Yeah.
I thought it was a great way to just share my book and like get feedback
Yeah,
and I don't think it would.
I like all of those, like there are a few different ones like that that I use. Like um I also use I mentioned the pros before. That's similar to it, and I've communicated with some people on there too, and I have like some fans of what I do on there too, and then also
It's
I
called
also
prose.
on Medium, which is a similar platform. I've talked to a few people through that too. So yeah, those are I love that all of those tools are available through the internet.
I know, and you feel like somebody. I haven't read your chapters, but I want to read your whole. I want to read your book. It sounds really good.
Oh yeah,
It
thanks.
almost sounds like almost like Greek mythology too, or something like that.
Oh, I
Like it
hadn't thought
just
of
like
that
the character.
before. That's interesting.
Um, I don't know. It just sounds like that whole like larger than human, but still human. Like because when you're adjusting like the baseline of like morality or what makes us human, like it's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so part of the reason I wanted to do that with my writing, and I sort of often end up doing that sort of thing anyway, like kind of write from the perspective of the bad guy, is that I always like it in movies and in novels when the bad guy wins. Like the
Yeah.
like it's just more interesting to me because it's more unexpected, and like I was talking about earlier, since it's just a fictional universe and there are no real life consequences, it's more interesting to me.
Right. Right. Like why women are, I know like I always have this thing with like with my fiction where I'm like, I really want to like I don't know if I consciously do it, but I really want to sort of trick someone in a way or the reader into a mind, not trick them, but like maybe like lull them into the logic of that dysfunctional environment. Like, how we were talking
Hmm.
about families, like, okay, this is like, and I feel like fairly successful with my series of novels about the woman who, of course, now, like with my mom, like who she got in this affair with this guy in the 40s and he ended up like, it's so long and hard to get into, but she basically gets sent to a mental hospital in the 1940s here in Oregon, and
Wow.
she very possibly could have a lobotomy, back then.
Yeah, when
And
did
as
they
a
stop
punishment,
doing those?
well, so the frontal lobotomy they started, I think it came here from like, there was a no, I guess a surgeon in Portugal in like the 20s, and then in the 30s it started here, and then from the 40s to the late 50s, mid late 50s, they were still doing the frontal lobotomy, which is the really bad one where they do the ice pick. And
Yeah, and they
then,
just
so
scramble your brains.
totally, that's what they do. And then there was what they call a new wave of psychosurgery, and that was in the late 60s and 70s. And that's the one my mom got caught up in. One of the hubs of that was Boston, Massachusetts, in Mass General, and these were a little different. They weren't like the frontal lobotomy. They had this, and they still use actually these surgeries for certain things. And they're actually,
Oh,
I've been
really?
reading some articles. Yeah, I've been reading some articles where they want to start using them again,
Wow.
but if for like they use them for OCD that doesn't respond to anything else. And but back then what they do is they drill, like they have this, it's called like it's stereotactic surgery or something, and it's like they had this before MRIs, they had this like basically like a measurement thing on that they screwed into your scalp, and they could with x-rays see exactly where the limbic system was, and they knew that if they severed nerve fibers, burned, lesions, small lesions in that area, that it impacted emotions and not so much personality like the frontal lobe one. But so they would put electrodes in and then heat them up, and then they would burn like a raisin size lesion in these areas. And no one ever talks about this phase in the 70s, but so it started in the 70s, and there was like a lot were done, and people were doing them for anything basically. Like my mom would have been a perfect candidate given some of her problems, and they did them, and there was a big push for it. But the crazy thing is, this whole story is so crazy. In Boston, they got this big grant from the National Institute of Mental Health, because they started saying that violence, and there was a lot of race riots, that violence was the result of brain dysfunction, and they wanted to start screening African American men and giving them these psychosurgeries.
Of course, African American men.
Right, exactly. Not all of the. So there was this doctor, Peter Breggin, who was also from Harvard, and he set this whole campaign, and everyone reacted to that. Like, of course, it was the 60s. But they were trying to set up, like, they were just doing this rogue, doing these surgeries, and then they kind of got shut down and the grant got removed. But yeah, no one really knows about that whole period, but they were doing it on children. And I mean, it was pretty bad.
Yeah.
So they're still doing a little. Yeah.
So I didn't even know that they're still doing something like that. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, they have these two things now. One is I think they still do the surgery, but now it's not as invasive, because they have like I don't know what it's called, like a laser or something, where they can go in and pinpoint it with an MRI. But they also have deep brain stimulation that they do for Parkinson's, where they put, and I think it does help, they put electrodes in, and then there's a thing that can control stimulating areas of the brain. But that can be removed. I mean, what they probably did to my mom, was permanent. So.
Right. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So crazy that goes on.
I know. And the thing is, like, I met this guy on Twitter, and I read his book. He wrote a book about lobotomies and psychosurgery and stuff. And in one of my episodes of the Diarist, because of course the lobotomy comes up in that too, right? Like in one of my episodes of the Diarist, I end up doing a bonus episode where I have Dr. Freeman, the lobotomist, he's the famous lobotomist. I have not a skit, like an episode with him where he's doing a lecture. So he's like explaining how it's done on my podcast with one of my characters that he supposedly did a lobotomy on. And so this guy, it actually ended up, the actors were so good. It was so perfect. Really good. But this guy who wrote this book was like, oh, this is an interesting way to talk about this or whatever. So then I wrote him and I was like, do you know anything about these psychosurgeries in Massachusetts? And he had happened to go somewhere, and he took PDF images of all of these notes from the International Society for Psychosurgery right around that time. So all the big names, I mean, there wasn't really that much there, but it was like the correspondences about these doctors who were pushing so hard to be able to do this without any regulation or anything. I mean, which is why I'm so cynical. I mean, this is Harvard University.
Yeah. Holy shit. Wow.
And they're telling all these people that, I mean, that's why I feel like I'm so cynical. Like, I don't trust anybody. It's like, I'm sure it comes from that, like.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense. Yeah. It's like, we might have talked about this before, but I mean, how did you and your siblings get through that?
I don't know. I mean, I think that, how did we get, I really don't, I mean, I really, really don't know. I think I mean, I think I don't know what my sister would say, but I know having my sister and my brother, but my sister was older, like she totally kept me in reality, you know? And she totally protected me too. I mean, she really helped me and she kept me, you know, I felt she was like my sanity. And then the same with my brother. I mean, we all have our problems, though. We all have PTSD. You know, I've had like, you know, I have these learning disabilities. I have like, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't had, you know, I haven't drank in 16 years, but I had a real problem with drugs and alcohol. And
Uh-huh.
I don't think, you know, I think we got through it, but we didn't. I don't think I totally got through it, you know.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's sad. Well, I mean, you're way more well adjusted than you could have been, at least.
Yeah, that's true. And you know, I'm happy. Like I'm happily married. I love my daughter more than anything. You know, I'm happy, but I think, you know, like I said to my husband the other day, like I wake up and I worry all the time. And I'm like, you know, trauma changes your brain. You know what I mean? And so the idea that
Yeah.
at 50, whatever, like that kind of running anxiety, I mean, there is research that says mindfulness and meditation actually can change it, but I don't know.
Yeah, I meditate. It seems to help me.
Yeah, I mean, there's brain science now that shows that it actually strengthens those connections that, you know, help address trauma and stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how we got through it. You know, I do think a lot of people, you know, a lot. I mean, that's like, I think a lot of people get through stuff and go through stuff. And like, I'm a big one for like not, you know, like I do a lot of activism for sexual assault survivors and stuff. And, you know, like I won't get on my bandwagon, but like the whole Me Too movement, I have always kind of objected to that because I'm like, I don't know, like I feel like that I have like a whole thing with the whole Me Too thing. But I mean, I think the big thing is
Oh, people get
stand.
mad at me. People get mad at me for saying that they go a little too far sometimes.
I don't I've never from minute one I have not I have found this to be I don't know I'm a sexual assault survivor. I do activism around sexual assault. I've talked to so many. I spent like 2 years interviewing women who are survivors, and these women are speaking out. And I think the problem is that people don't want to hear it, and some of those people that don't want to hear it are women. You know, it's like great.
Yeah.
I'm glad that women tell their story, but like how many times do I have people say to me like, oh my god, I can't believe you were raped or whatever. It's like 1 in 3 women are raped, you know. And it's like you're not so different. You have to stand up and you have to like be in solidarity. You know, I know it's not popular and I've never really been able to articulate it, but I'm not really into like, okay, I'm just gonna like accuse somebody and they're gonna like that doesn't even make sense, you know. It's like I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so much about Me Too that I have a problem with, and I know that it's so not popular, but I don't care.
It sounds like you're talking about like having a little bit of having a little bit of personal power, really, like not defining yourself based on your victimhood status, even if you are a victim as you are. Does that sound right?
Right. Yeah, I think that is true, and I also think like very strongly that like I did in one of my classes, we talk about bias, right? And we talk about like when you're biased and you're racist or something, and then they talk about like in-group preference. And there's studies that show more damage is done by preferring or favoring people that you see like yourself than actual outward prejudice. So
Oh, interesting.
yeah. And this is like in the healthcare is every field because all of those little things add up, and you're like, oh, I know Andrew. Yeah, Andrew I believe what he's saying. Or I know, so and so, or they're like me. Even if you think someone's like you, you're gonna do more. And a lot of those things cross race and culture and all this stuff, but they also cross other lines. And I think I've seen so many women engage in um, I've seen so many women, and I have my issues with men, no doubt, but like I've seen so many women engage in like activities that um that oppress other women, and I think it's because of this in-group preference, like things like white privilege override, you know, all
Yeah.
this other stuff, right? Like, I mean, and so like you think, oh, I'm speaking out. It's like, yeah, you're speaking out, but you're still like keeping quiet when it's most important,
Yeah.
um I don't know, like I had heard this trans woman, I don't know, I think it was on, I don't know, it was maybe it was even on like like I Am Caitlyn, that show, Caitlyn Jenner. I don't know if it was on that, but
She
it
has
might
a
have been on
show?
something like
I
that.
didn't know she has a
Huh?
show. I didn't know she has a
Yeah, yeah,
show.
she has a show on like TLC. But
Oh,
she
wow.
was like trying to say to everyone how she's so political, and all these like trans activists are like, you're not political, give me a break. And like this one woman said something and it always stuck with me, and um it was like, don't say you're like, what do they say? There's a term, it's not solidarity, but don't say you're my ally. Don't say you're my ally unless you stand up and walk through the crowd with me. Like, you might
Okay.
support my cause, but you're not my ally if you're not willing to take some heat for it. You know what I mean? Like, if you're
That's
not willing.
where that's where Jonathan Haidt talks about the idea of virtue signaling, that talking about how, you know, we're standing up for these women because they're victims, but you don't actually go out and do anything about it. It's like you talk about like you post on Twitter that you really are in solidarity with these women, but then in real life you just go and watch Netflix or something like that.
Right. Right. And in real life, you like, I mean, I've talked to a lot of women who I actually reached out to so many journalists and women and, really, really trying to get, I mean, a lot has actually happened with this group of women that I work with, but just like, you know, silence, like nobody can even lift a finger to like even like a post from one of these women, but then they'll be
Wow.
like, me too, hashtag me too. It's like, no, but you won't, like, you know what I mean? Like, you can't even like hit the like button on somebody's post when they're suing a rapist, like,
Wow.
yeah, I know, I'm so cynical.
Well, that's understandable, and I appreciate um, having had a woman on my podcast saying that, because coming from me, some people accuse me being of sexist for making similar points.
Yeah, I don't think men can really say anything right now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, I'm inherently a bad person because I'm a I'm a cisgendered white man, so I have all the power in the world, even though sure don't feel like I have very much power or influence.
I mean, I definitely have my issues with patriarchy and like all that stuff, but I think, yeah, it's hard though. I mean, I feel myself, like I see these things like what we're doing to like these immigrant children, and I feel like the very kind of person that I just described with the Me Too thing. I feel like it's lip service. Like, why am I not doing more? Like, why am I mean, this is a concrete thing, that's happening. So, I mean, I feel like, yeah, I feel the same. I feel like I feel terrible. Why am I not doing something?
Yeah. At the same time, I mean, not to make excuses, but not everyone can do everything that they feel like they should be doing. Like I was watching a podcast with two philosophers about this yesterday. It was about the the extent to which we should moralize our lives, basically. And one of the guys basically thinks that you should moralize everything you do, but he's conflicted about that because he's a philosopher. So really, if he has that worldview in mind, he should be doing something better, like going and feeding the poor or helping the homeless or something like that, or working at a soup kitchen. And then the other guy, his perspective is that those are all good things to do, but you can have multiple different like moral goods that you're pursuing. You don't have to do like everything that you think you're supposed to do. So I mean that I guess that um maybe takes sort of the blame off of everyone if they're just supporting something. But it is like it is hypocritical to say that you support something but not even try to do anything about it still. I think it's understandable that it can be difficult to do everything that you want to prioritize, because
Right.
like what are you going to prioritize? Are you going to prioritize like stopping climate change? Are you going to prioritize
Right.
any number of other sorts of activism that makes sense? Or like what, like it depends on what you want to prioritize, I guess.
Well, and it's just, I mean, I totally agree with you because there's so many things like that, but it's also like I feel like there are these like watershed moments that are happening in the world, but in America, like, and one of those was like the immigration thing, because I always felt like, okay, what's happening is so terrible, but Donald Trump, basically like did this, in my opinion, to see if the American public would. I mean, he basically did something like the Nazis did, and to see if the American public would just stand by and watch. And like a lot of the things that I've read and about Nazi Germany and stuff, and some of the things that he's done around immigration is directly taken from that playbook. And I'm like, I always think about that with Nazi Germany. Like, how did this happen? How did people? And it's like people just didn't do anything, And at what point? I just feel like this is like a really critical time. And I guess it's like, as an American, like I really don't know exactly what to do, And maybe that's what these women with the Me Too thing feel. Maybe they really feel like they don't know what to do.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's possible. I mean, that's that sort of thing happens with people who don't like Trump too. Like a lot of people will just make angry anti-Trump posts on Facebook and then not really do anything about it. And I mean, and at the same time too, not to excuse anything Trump's did, of course. Like some of the bad shit he's done is stuff that other presidents have done too. Like in the same, he did the same thing. Well, actually, he was even worse than Obama on whistleblowers. But both of them said that they wouldn't prosecute whistleblowers when they were campaigning, and then they did, or at least Obama like illegally imprisoned people and tortured them and stuff like that. And then Trump did the same thing, except he actually went even farther than Obama and arrested Julian Assange. And then also, just like Obama, he was talking as if he was anti-interventionist when he was running for election, but then once he became president, he accelerated all the regime change wars and attacking countries that basically just to, like I said, just like engineer a regime change so you can have dictators set up there who you can work with, so you can keep maintaining the war machine and profiting off of it and all that kind of stuff.
well, and maybe those are the reasons that like well, they obviously are, right? The reasons the conservatives really want him there, because there's no other reason, But I also feel like the things that make me feel like these are watershed are like, I guess it's like, yeah, I mean, all of our presidents have been pretty diabolical, but like, I guess the stuff that he's doing publicly, like, it just pushes the American people
Yeah.
into a
Well, he's a troll, I think. Like he
yeah.
just says like he says so much terrible shit. I sort of think he says it for reactions sometimes. Like not that he doesn't mean it. It seems like he does often mean it, but it seems like he's saying these things deliberately to piss people off, and it always works.
But like yeah, right. It always does. But like the big things, the immigrate, like separating the children, like
Hmm.
supporting the Nazis during, like I had listened to some podcast, like it was after I listened to it way after, like they had done the podcast before. I forgot I think it was like, it was one of the famous ones, or like these two guys, but they were like, he'll never get through this, Charleston. He'll never get through doing this. It's like he got through it. Nobody even cared. I mean,
He can do anything and get away with it, seemingly.
yeah, I mean, maybe the American people are just so, I don't know. I feel like I don't know what to do, really. I mean, I could do more for sure. But like, we're all watching this happen. And a lot of the things that are like happening or, building towards like, I don't know, like it just seems like it, like for immigrants for sure. I mean, it's a terrible situation, and
Yeah.
but I guess a lot of it was there in the first place or
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
not new.
yeah, I mean, again, not to say that Trump isn't worse, because I think he is in most ways at least. But I mean, Obama did the same sort of thing and separated children from their families at the borders. Although, I mean, it seems like Trump is, like I said, he's worse about it, and it seems like he's done it. Well, actually, I'm not sure whether he's done it more, but either way, it's fucked up shit either way.
Right. Right. And you guys have such a wonderful leader.
He's way better
I
than
don't know. Do
Trump.
you like him, Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, I don't like him as much as I did before. I did honestly vote for him, and I think he's done some good things, but I've been sort of disappointed in other things that he's done. But the other options, like, that I could have voted for, didn't sound good to me. And also, I remember um, the reasons that I personally voted for Trudeau were one of the things he said he was going to do that he did do. I think he actually did do all three of these things, but he said he was going to legalize weed, which he did. And I don't like that just for my own selfish purposes. I think it's also a good thing to do. But he also was the only one who said he was going to like reverse or somehow get rid of this bill. One was it basically was focusing on prosecuting prostitutes in prostitution cases. He said he was going to like basically dismantle that bill. And then also another one from our previous prime minister, Stephen Harper, which was it's something about how if your parents were not born in Canada, you can be deported at any time for any reason whatsoever. It's sort of like that travel ban that Trump tried to impose but failed to do so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Because from our end of things, like you guys are like, everybody wants to be there.
Yeah. Well, that was our previous, I said president. I can't believe I said that. Our previous prime minister who did that. I wasn't a fan of him.
But yeah, wow. Well, I want to read your book. So I really need to get a link to that.
Oh yeah, I think I sent you one a long time ago, the last time we talked, but I can send it to you again.
Yeah,
The link.
I ended up like sort of drowning in stuff and like lost track with the podcast and then my work, and I lost track of everything I was doing. But now things
Okay.
have slowed down tremendously. So
Okay.
maybe
Cool.
too much.
Yeah. Well, we talked about all sorts of interesting topics that I didn't expect to talk about, so this is fun.
I know. I love talking to you. You give me so many ideas and you're so smart, and I really want to read your book.
Oh, thanks a lot. Well, yeah, I'll send you the link for it for sure.
Awesome. And I will, when I have my first draft of my memoir, if you're interested, I'll send it to you.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
it'll be a while, obviously, but I will. Do you want me to send you some of the links to that brain surgery stuff?
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
There's just been, I found so many like people talking about it on YouTube, and there was none of that like 3 years ago. So it's this particular period in the 70s.
Okay.
So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds cool. Well, I think we didn't talk about favorite authors yet, but I don't know. Do you still want to keep talking a little bit? We have been talking for a while. Oh,
Can
sorry.
we maybe I get a little I usually go to bed by now. But can we could do a follow-up. You want to do a
Yeah,
follow-up?
yeah, we could do that.
Maybe we should like actually, what we should do is we should actually do it after we should set a timeline, read each other's stuff, right? You've listened to some of the podcast.
Yeah, some of it. And I read I forget which one it was, but I read one of your books. I think it was the one specifically that you recommended to me. I forget which one it was though. Yeah.
Well, you know what? you might be interested in is my first memoir. I don't know, not to like, and it's kind of
Yeah.
narcissistic to send someone your memoir. Another thing you might be interested in about me is what I wrote about my life.
Yeah.
But if you are, I'll send you that, or you can read my short stories or whatever. And then we should talk again. We should, and actually focus on the authors and the stories.
Yeah. Yeah. We could do that for sure. Yeah. Sounds good.
I
Okay.
would love to.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, yeah, if you want
Awesome.
to end it here and plan on doing that next time, that sounds good. I'll say all the stuff that I like to say at the end of my episodes, and then you can give any last words and plugs for your writing and stuff there.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks everyone for watching another episode of the Mindgasms podcast. Hope you enjoyed this episode. It was really interesting to talk about these topics that I didn't expect talking about. And yeah, so also thanks so much to everyone who likes this video, shares it, subscribes to my channel, and especially to those of you who contribute to me on Patreon. I really appreciate that, and I'll put the link in the description for this video for that, like I always do. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all. All right, keep having mindgasms, everyone. And any plugs or last words there, Donna?
You can check out, find links to all my writing at donnabarrow-green.com.
I'll add that to the description.
Awesome.
Awesome. All right.
All right.
Well,
I will email you all that stuff. And it's been so great talking to you.
all right. Yeah.
All right.
All right.
Talk
Thanks,
to you again
everyone,
soon.
and adios. Yeah, for sure. All right. Adios, everyone.